So let's get into our green drinks about electric vehicles and hybrids. We have two presenters today. I'm so happy they both, it worked out for us all to kind of come together. So we're going to have Dave Roberts and Samantha Hurt present to us today. And Dave is going to go first. So he is the senior consultant at VEIC, which stands for Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. He has more than 20 years of experience in transportation efficiency research and implementation activities, which deliver economic, environmental, and social benefits. Dave is currently leading VEIC's work coordinating the Drive Electric Vermont program. He holds a BS in civil engineering from the University of Virginia and a MBA from the University of Vermont. So I hope that's enough of an introduction. Dave, and I will let you get going.
Great, thanks so much, Ginevra, and thanks to everyone who's joining. Nice night to be inside. It's cold out there, so I'm happy to be spending some time with you talking about electric cars. So I'm going to be providing kind of an overview to electric vehicles, how they work in Vermont, some of the incentives. My focus is going to be on plug-in electric vehicles, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And then Samantha is going to pick up and talk a little bit about the programs that her organization, Capstone, is running that's providing incentives for a variety of efficient vehicles in the state. And then definitely look forward to the discussion. So I hope people will be chatting their questions as we go. I'm going to have to run through some of this material pretty quickly, so we have time for that. So I know this is being recorded. We have a lot of information and resources on the Drive Electric Vermont website. Happy to follow up following this session too if folks need more assistance or have more questions. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And let's see. Can I get a thumbs up? Are people seeing my screen? Yes, good. All right. So a little bit about Drive Electric Vermont. It's a public-private partnership started back in 2012 between VEIC and the state of Vermont. We're working on several fronts to basically make it easier to drive an electric car in the state, and that's me and my Chevrolet Bolt and our dog Rosalita in the backseat driver. Couple quick reasons, why make the switch to driving an electric car? So emissions reductions is a big one, both carbon emissions as well as other harmful tailpipe pollutants. They have great performance. If you haven't had a chance to get behind the wheel of one, I really encourage that. I know it's tough these days with COVID and restrictions. Many times we like to do these events where people can actually get in the car afterward, but can't do that today. So, but you can still go to a dealer, go for a test drive, maybe have a friend who's willing to let you go for a ride or drive in their car. You'll find that they really do have great performance, usually better than a comparable gasoline vehicle. They're super quiet, so it's a very comfortable ride. You can plug them in and charge them at home. In most cases, if you have power near where you park your vehicles, you can just plug it right into a standard outlet or install a higher powered charger. And they do offer some significant savings, particularly on the operational side. Driving on electricity is the equivalent of about $1.50 gallon gasoline before any of the sort of special programs for lower off-peak charging rates are factored in. So, two basic types of plug-in electric vehicles that I'm talking about tonight then are the all-electric models, which are powered solely by a battery, which is connected to an electric motor. So depending on the vehicle and the conditions, you might get anywhere from 70 to over 300 miles of range on a single charge. The other type is a plug-in hybrid. So that has the same sort of battery and electric motor. It's usually a smaller battery, so you'll get anywhere from 15 to 80 miles of range on the battery. But then you also have a sort of a backup gasoline tank and internal combustion engine. So you can drive 300 miles or more on gasoline and just keep filling up the tank. So if you're going on a longer trip and you're worried about where you're going to be able to charge, or maybe you don't have great charging opportunities at home, a plug-in hybrid is a nice way to sort of balance and not kind of jump in with both feet if you're worried about charging availability. Some of the more popular models, just to give you some different examples, on the left side of this are some of the all electrics that are available in Vermont, and on the right side are plug-in hybrids. Different ranges. Those prices that are listed are before any incentives are factored in. And so the Nissan Leaf is one of the more affordable options. It starts around $30,000 before incentives. We'll get about 150 miles of range, or there's a version of it with a larger battery, costs some more money, but you do get more range, which is nice. Teslas are very popular. A lot of people, when they hear about electric cars, they think about Teslas. They definitely have some real interesting technology, great performance. Um, some pros and cons basically to all the different models, and people just need to figure out what's going to work best for them. On the right side, some of the all-wheel drive models. That's a common request in Vermont. Folks are looking for all-wheel drive for winter conditions. So the Mitsubishi Outlander is an all-wheel drive model, gets about 22 miles of electric range. Then you can run on gasoline. The Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid has less electric range, about 17 miles, but once again, you can run on gasoline for longer trips. So it just depends on sort of your daily commute and needs. A lot of people can maybe do most of their daily driving on that electric range, and then, have the gasoline when they need for longer trips. We have on the Drive Electric Vermont website sort of an EV model explorer that will allow you to filter for different vehicle types and ranges, and whether it's all-wheel drive, different incentives, things like that. So there's currently over 30 models available, so lots to explore and more coming all the time. Some of the other electric options that are out there that I'll just briefly mention, we do have some electric buses running in Burlington and more coming to several communities across the state. Electric bicycles are a great way to get around. I believe there is an Upper Valley Electric Bicycle Initiative, and Local Motion in Vermont has a statewide program to offer sort of an e-bike loaner program. So those are things that you might want to explore if that's of interest. Burlington has, CarShare Vermont has a Nissan Leaf all-electric model in their fleet. We've got electric lawn care equipment, which many utilities are offering incentives for these days, as well as electric motorcycles. So lots of ways to get around without running on fossil fuels. Important thing to keep in mind, especially this time of year in Vermont, is that cold weather will reduce electric range by 20 to 50%, depending on the model and the conditions. And I'm just going to bring up, this is a link to the Drive Electric Vermont website page that's referenced on that slide. And this is a post that gets into a lot more detail that talks about, when the temperature gets down to maybe -4 Fahrenheit, that's when you're looking at that -4, or roughly half of the manufacturer's official range estimate, about 50% of the official range. There are some things you can do to recover some of that. So we've got some tips here that talk about preheating while the vehicle is still plugged in, using heated seats and steering wheels instead of the cabin heat, which is a more efficient way, and some other things to check. So just something really important to keep in mind before you make a purchase is to know that you will get less range in the cold winter conditions like we have now. In terms of charging, there's 3 different types. There's level 1, which plugs right into a standard home outlet. You get about 5 miles of range per hour of charging. Level 2 charging has roughly 4 or 5 times as fast, depending on the vehicle and the charging equipment. This is a 240 volt charger that's shown here in the middle of the slide. The one that has 2 plugs on it, this is the type of charger you might see in public. And this is more like a home use charger, and this can actually plug into a 240 volt receptacle if some folks may have those for an RV or other equipment in their garage to streamline the installation. And 240 volt is the same type of electricity that you might use for like an electric clothes dryer, so higher voltage, more power. And it just really speeds up charging. It's definitely desired if you're looking at one of the all-electric models that gets over 200 miles of range. makes charging much more convenient. But for some of the plug-in hybrids, you may be able to sort of make do with just the level 1 charging. Normally, that'll be able to charge a plug-in hybrid overnight. And then at the upper end of the scale, you have DC fast charging. It's very high powered, 480 volts, typically used for sort of longer distance travel. So it's more of a quick stop for 30 minutes to an hour before you get back on the road. There are 2 different plug types for fast charging, depending on your vehicle, that are shown here. And then Tesla also has their own dedicated fast charger network with its own plug type. Everyone for level 1 and 2 charging, all the automakers use the same plug except for Tesla, which has an adapter so they can use this type of equipment. And this is just a quick map showing some of the charging across the state. Vermont actually made the news in the last week as having the highest per capita number of charging opportunities in the country. The orange points here are fast chargers and the green are level 2. So there are a lot of charging and more coming. And then I mentioned Tesla has their own dedicated network of fast charging. And so if you're doing a lot of long distance travel or you want to go cross country, you can do it in a non-Tesla all-electric car, but definitely requires a lot more planning and consideration, whereas Tesla really has this network dialed in for longer distance travel. These are some of the locations that the state of Vermont is funding with Volkswagen diesel settlement funds. They should be coming online in the next, hopefully, year or so. So these orange dots are additional fast chargers that will be coming up in the near future. And once those are in place, basically, you could go anywhere in Vermont and never be more than 30 miles to reach a fast charging location. So some of the purchase incentives that are out there, there's a federal tax credit. It's up to $7,500 based on the battery size in the vehicle. It begins to sunset as manufacturers reach 200,000 sales. So Tesla and General Motors have hit that sunset. So there's no longer federal tax credit available for them. There has been some talk of sort of renewing that in Congress. It's possible that could happen. Maybe a little more possible with the recent election results than would have otherwise been the case. But until that happens, I wouldn't rely on it. It is a tax credit, so it's something you would claim on your income taxes unless you're leasing an electric car, in which case that tax credit actually goes to the leasing company as they technically own it. And then usually that leasing company will then pass through at least a portion of the tax credit to you in the form of a lower down payment or monthly payments. It doesn't carry over into future years the way some other tax credits might, so that's important to factor into your incentive calculations. The state of Vermont is offering up to $4,000 depending on your income and the type of electric vehicle you're looking at. There's the state has put a limit that only vehicles with a base price of $40,000 or less are eligible for the state incentives. So some of the more expensive Teslas and other models are not eligible, even if you do meet the income requirement. There's currently about $650,000 remaining. Hopefully will last at least several more months, and there are conversations to provide additional funding, but at this point, nothing has been appropriated. So, if you're interested in taking advantage of this, I would always suggest you act while those funds are remaining. And that amount that's remaining is updated regularly on the Drive Electric Vermont website. And those state incentives are distributed in partnership with electric utilities. And you can either claim it through a consumer direct incentive, which is sort of a mail-in rebate, where you get pre-approved before you purchase, you get your electric car, and then you do a mail-in rebate, and your utility will send you a check. Or you could go to one of a number of dealerships across the state that will pass through that state incentive as part of your deal at the time of sale. Makes things a lot easier, and we do have a list of all those dealers who are participating in that on the Drive Electric website. And then in addition, pretty much all the electric utilities in the state are offering incentives, generally up to about $2,500, depending on your income and the type of electric car. Many utilities are also offering incentives for home charging equipment. And we have a lot of information on the Drive Electric website, which is shown here, about all the different incentives. And hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll be updating that with this calculator, which isn't on there now, but this will just make it easier for you to look at some of the different incentives that are out there for new and used vehicles. And just going through to give you a quick example of what it might look like. This is a sort of a test version, but as you provide your utility, the type of vehicle and whether it's new or used, the car make, your tax filing income and status, and so then you'll see an estimate of the total incentive that's going to be available for you. And the way that lines up right now, just as an example for that Nissan Leaf, one of the more affordable models, once you layer in the tax credit, the state incentive, any OEM or original, these are automaker discounts that are out there in some cases for different models. The Nissan Leaf has had pretty significant discounts from Nissan. Utility incentive, you can bring that $31,000 price down to roughly $14,000 for sort of the standard incentive amounts. And if you're less than $50,000 adjusted gross income, you can qualify for higher incentives that bring that cost down even further, and significantly less than, say, a comparable gasoline vehicle like the Nissan Sentra shown here. So I'm going to wrap up there. Just a reminder that, there are a lot of models that are out there today, but many more coming in the next few years. We hear a lot of interest in electric pickup trucks. Definitely look forward to seeing more of those in Vermont. And we've got a great network of charging, but more on the way. We do know for folks who live in apartments or condos, there can be some unique challenges in that multifamily housing context. So if folks want to talk more about that, I'm happy to, and we do have some resources that I can provide on that front. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Ginevra.
Thanks so much, Dave. That was really helpful. We have like a million questions coming in, but we're going to wait and get through our second presenter, which I'm very excited for, Samantha, before we take questions. So I have Samantha's bio here. She joined Capstone in the fall of 2020 as the Mileage Smart Program Manager. Prior to working with Capstone, she has worn several different hats, serving as an advocate in the Vermont State House to promote toxic chemical reform and zero waste initiatives, organizing Canvas operations, and most recently, she worked on the Bernie 2020 campaign in New Hampshire. Samantha moved to Vermont in 2014 to complete her global studies degree at UVM. Her passion for grassroots community organizing has driven her professional career, and while she's not working, she often volunteers on local campaigns. She lives in the New North End of Burlington with her partner and their 2 cats. In COVID times, they try their best to get outside, kitties included, although they usually have to cut their adventure time short due to what is affectionately dubbed as coldy paws. The bio, I love this bio. It takes such a turn halfway through. It's so funny. Okay, so that's the intro here, and I'm going to let you get going, Samantha, so we can get to all these questions. I'm very excited to hear about Mileage Smart.
Thank you, Ginevra, and thank you, David, for doing such a great job teeing up the Mileage Smart program. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can you all see this?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So again, Mileage Smart is a program that the state initiated, and it's being overseen by Capstone, which is the organization that I work for. I'll be going over the program as well as eligibility and program requirements, and then a brief overview of the process. So the goal of Mileage Smart is to help low to moderate income Vermonters get into energy efficient vehicles. And as Dave briefly mentioned, this program focuses on a little different of a pool of vehicles rather than just EVs and hybrid plug-ins. Our requirement for vehicles is based on MPG. So you're going to be seeing a larger pool. We have about $680,000 remaining. And as Dave mentioned, the legislature has not yet reallocated funds for this program just yet. Hopefully that'll be coming within the next couple of months. And this program covers 25% of the initial sale price, so up to $5,000. And taxes and registration fees are not included. The 25% is based on what that car is listed as. So if you go online and you're looking at a local dealership, it's going to be 25% of that price that you see. And so far, over the handful of months that this program has been active, the incentive on average is about $3,800 per participant. And if some of you are familiar with Capstone, you know that Capstone works generally in central Vermont. However, this program is statewide. You don't have to be in Capstone's service area. And then another important note about this program is that the incentive is not retroactive. If folks want to use the incentive, they have to be actively enrolled in the program and going through the various steps. And then if you would like to learn more about the mileage bar incentive itself, here's the website there. So who qualifies? Here are all the qualifications listed out. You have to be at or below 80% median income based on household size. You have to be an adult. You must be employed on disability over 60 years old. And I want to note on this point, because of COVID, we have been lenient. So many folks' situations have been changing. You can't guarantee that everyone's going to be employed, but if you need a car, you need a car. You can't be claimed as a dependent, and you must be a Vermont resident. More on qualifications, here's the link below. And then here also is the maximum income requirements. It is different for Chittenden, Franklin, and Grand Isle, but the rest of the state is this column right here. And this is also on the website. So eligible vehicles, as I mentioned, this program bases its eligibility on MPG as long as the vehicle has a combined MPG of at least 40, it is eligible. It must be clean, no salvages. It must be purchased at a registered Vermont dealership, no private sales, primary vehicle. And here, let's see if I can just pull this up for you all. So this is our updated list. We have over 70 eligible vehicles. And all of these vehicles, I actually don't know if this was mentioned. Yes, used. So as you can see, there are some vehicles listed here that say 2020. So these are only vehicles that have come back around as pre-owned, not the new models. So that link is found if you go onto this page at the bottom. And then once you find a vehicle that you like, you have to either, if you need to finance, you need to find a loan. And this program does have lender requirements. This is part of Capstone's effort to protect consumers and help folks learn about the process of finding financing. Oftentimes what I've seen, this might be someone's first time getting a loan. So this is part of that education process and making sure that someone isn't being tricked or pulled into a situation where they're going to end up paying for this years and years and years down the road. So Our loan requirements is that they must have a brick and mortar location in Vermont. The APR must not exceed 12%. And then these lenders you see here do have special discounted interest rates for high MPG vehicles. And then the link at the bottom here will take you to our lender page. So how do you get the incentive? First step, apply online. Once you apply, I determine whether or not the applicant is eligible, and then you find a car, go online. If you have a place down the road and you're comfortable stopping in, you can do that. And then you get pre-approved at a Vermont-based lending institution, and you are all set. So here's an example I put together. We've got Jane Doe, who lives in Windsor County. Jane Doe is in a 4-person household. Their collective income is $60,000. Jane is not a dependent. Jane provided a Vermont driver's license, and they're 18 years or older. Obviously, Jane Doe is not real, but this vehicle I pulled off of Midstate's website. And based on all of our requirements, this vehicle is eligible. It is $16,099, which is below the NADA clean retail value. It is 112 MPG, well over the 40 MPG combined requirement. And Jane was able to secure a loan for 3.1% at 48 months. So since this vehicle and the loan check out, Jane received the incentive, which is 25% of, oh, as you can see, I did my math wrong here, but let's just pretend that I did the math correctly. And then as Dave mentioned in his presentation, there are additional incentives. Some providers do offer incentives on electric vehicles. There are incentives on new electric vehicles as well as used. So for GMP, that's going to be $750. And then you'll end up with total money down on that vehicle. And that is my presentation. So I will try to figure out how to stop sharing.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Samantha, that was great. I thought you did your math right, but maybe I'm bad at math. So I think, yeah, thank you both for those presentations. I learned some things I was not previously aware of, so that's great info for me. We've got a lot of questions in our chat here, and I would love it, Michael, if you could also take a look, because I'm worried I'm going to miss some questions. And we've got some people watching on Facebook Live as well. Mostly just commenting, good job. But are you there, Michael?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think now is a great time to take questions, and keep typing them in if they keep coming up for anyone. But I guess I'll start at the beginning, which is Lori asked, what is the cradle to grave comparison, including batteries, for electric versus a typical internal combustion car?
So I'll take a stab at that. It's a bit of a moving target because those manufacturing emissions, which are the critical ingredient oftentimes for an EV, especially in Vermont, because we have a relatively low carbon sources of electricity for things that are powered off our grid. So it's really the manufacturing emissions that are often sort of highlighted. Emissions and, you know, there's mention of some of the minerals, cobalt in particular is one, gets a lot of attention because of the sourcing for that in the Congo, which is unfortunately subject to a lot of human rights issues. So there are numerous studies. I think one has already come through in the chat. I'm going to chat a few more links that folks might find helpful on this topic. But generally speaking, it's important to take these things into consideration. But you know, there's a good amount of scientific evidence that suggests that EVs are still cleaner than internal combustion engine vehicles when you take these issues into consideration. Especially in Vermont with our clean electric grid, you're talking about an EV. If you're looking sort of New England wide, the Union of Concerned Scientists, which I've included a link to this in the chat, suggests New England wide, an EV is the equivalent of about 114 mile per gallon efficiency vehicle. In Vermont, that is likely significantly higher because our grid is cleaner than New England generally. But it's an important issue for sure. So I don't mean to suggest that automakers shouldn't continue making progress on this. And on the mineral side, I did include in the chat link a link to some of Tesla's reporting on conflict minerals and cobalt in particular. It's not just an issue with electric cars. The lithium-ion batteries that EVs use are widely present in many devices, laptops and smartphones and other things. So, there's a strong need to continue to improve on that front. And a lot of the automakers are also looking at ways to reduce the use of those minerals in batteries. So General Motors and Tesla both have announced newer battery chemistries that minimize the use of cobalt. So there's a lot going on in this realm, and I'm happy to kind of dig in further, but that's at least a overview of some of the topics on that.
Thank you for including those links you mentioned. I haven't had a chance to scroll in the chat to see them, but I encourage people to take a look. I'm just going down the list. Sally wants to know just generally, what are lease versus purchase considerations when you're getting one of these cars?
So a lot of people like to lease electric cars. We actually have a blog post that I just chatted that does some of the pros and cons. Benefit of leasing is that the technology is changing pretty rapidly. So a lease is typically 2 or 3 years. And if you leased a new EV today in 2024, when your lease is up, you're probably going to have some different options, more all-wheel drive, more affordable, more range, faster charging. All these things are coming. So leasing can help sort of allow you to take advantage of the latest technology and protect you from depreciation. If you bought the car and then you tried to sell it in 3 years, it might be worth less than you anticipated. And so by leasing, you kind of avoid that. And one of the biggest advantages of leasing is if the vehicle you're purchasing is still eligible for the federal tax credit, then you don't need to sort of deal with claiming that credit on your own, because the leasing company will generally pass through at least a portion of it to you. And that's especially important for folks who may not have a huge tax liability. So if your tax liability is less than the amount of the tax credit, so for an all electric car that would normally be $7,500, then leasing might be the best way for you to take advantage of that credit. On the downside, it is typically a sort of a higher cost of ownership than buying a car and just owning it for 7 to 10 years or longer and running it into the ground, so to speak. And if you put a lot of miles on, typically leasing will come with anywhere between 10 and 15,000 miles a year sort of allowances. And if you go over that, you may be faced with a pretty significant charge at the end of the lease. Oftentimes it might be 20 to 25 cents per mile once you get over what's allowed in your lease agreement. So if you're racking on the miles, you may be better off just making a purchase up front. But there's some additional information in that link and some resources on leasing more generally if folks haven't had experience with that in the past.
Okay. You've got lots of links up your sleeve, Dave. This is maybe an unanswerable question, but I see Karen has asked, do you foresee any additional federal incentives for EV vehicles in 2021 with the new administration? And then what about in tandem with solar? So.
Yeah, it's hard. As I said, I think it's much more likely given the recent election results. We have a new administration, and President Biden has said explicitly that he wants to advance electric vehicles, and has also mentioned extending the tax credit and making some improvements to it. But that needs to get through Congress. So it's hard to say. If I would to put odds on it, I would say there's maybe a 60% chance, 60-70% chance that something will happen, at least on the EV front. I'm not sure on the solar side. I don't track that as closely, so maybe someone else has information on that. But right now, those programs are separate. So there's an EV tax credit and a solar tax credit and other things. And I would guess that they probably wouldn't combine them, but they might take specific actions on those individual programs.
And I know, Samantha, you mentioned that you weren't sure yet about if Vermont would be renewing the incentive. Did I get an accurate picture of that?
Correct.
When would we know?
I'm asking myself that question too. It all depends on when the legislature decides to bring this up in their committees. Not to promise anything at all, but we have been hearing positive things about this program, and there is interest. A lot of legislators do like it. It's just a matter of, do we continue with this program exactly how it is, or do we build something new with a similar effect?
Right.
And there are separate appropriations for Mileage Smart and the state of Vermont EV incentive.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them, hopefully we'll have some action taken in this session. It's maybe a little more promising now that the revenue, the funding situation isn't quite as dire as was previously thought, but there's still a lot of pressure on state funds. So, we'll have to see.
A related question here, David, about are there any incentives for used all-electric vehicles?
Yes. So there's the Mileage Smart program, which does include used all-electric vehicle eligibility if you meet the income requirements. But if you don't meet those income requirements, then there's no incentive for used vehicles. There's no federal tax credit. That's only on new vehicles. And there's no state EV incentive. That's only on new vehicles. But there are utility incentives. So you can check with your utility. We have on the Drive Electric website, we have links to all the utility programs. But for Green Mountain Power, Samantha mentioned, I think it's $750. And then they do have an additional $1,000. I'm just checking here. Yeah, $1,000 additional if you're low income for a used all electric vehicle.
Mm-hmm. We have another question about, is there any interest in creating a converter so non-Tesla cars can use a Tesla charger? This, I happen to know, comes from the owner of a EV Mini Cooper.
There is, for level 2 charging, there is a Tesla plug out there. You can Google around for that. It does exist. It's not something I personally have any experience with, but as far as the fast charging goes, there is no adapter that I know of. There's been some talk about Tesla opening up their fast charging network to other makes of vehicles. Elon Musk, who's the CEO, I guess, of Tesla, has stated that he's open to that, but so far I'm not aware of any automakers actually taking him up on it. So I wouldn't count on it for fast charging anytime soon, but there is something out there for level 2.
Wait, what was the name for the converter that you said?
Tesla, and the reason for that, for any nerds out there who really want to know this stuff, there's the plug format that all the non-Tesla vehicles use for level 1 and 2 charging is called a J1772. And that's the Society of Automotive Engineers standard that dictates how that plug is designed and used. And so that J plug, as it's sometimes called, combined with Tesla, you get Tesla. So.
Cool. I'd never heard that before, that word. So I'm scrolling down. If you have one ready to go, Michael, you can. I see there's been discussion about driving Vermont to Quebec and Montreal and kind of long trips.
Yep.
And someone mentioned the PlugShare app and website for planning charging when you're traveling.
Yeah, so I just pulled up a quick route plan on the PlugShare website. You can go down to the trip planner and you can say you want to go from Woodstock to Montreal, and it'll kind of map out a route and show you all the charging. You can say you don't want to go sort of more than 2 miles or some distance away to get to a charger. Once you get into Quebec, there's tons of charging. They have a very extensive network that Hydro-Quebec has helped build out. I've certainly done the trip from the Burlington area myself. Some of it's going to depend on your car and how much range you have. It's very doable, depending on the car. But you may need to, if you're coming from Woodstock, you may need to stop at a fast charger on your way, and certainly would probably want to charge somewhere in Montreal before you head back. And we do have some links on the Drive Electric website that talks about some of the different charging networks that you may want to become a member of to make it easier when you show up at one of these public charging stations to take payment and things like that.
It's cool to see the map. I don't know which program this question is directed to, so maybe both. But I guess, I don't know. Chuck, what happens to the incentives when you resell the car? Is there a required time of ownership?
There isn't. I think the state there is a limit of one incentive per individual or married couple for the state EV incentive. So you wouldn't be able to run out and get another one with a state incentive if you did sell it. There is also a requirement that if you're leasing, that the lease be for a term of at least 24 months. I think the hope is that folks will hang on to them, but situations can change, and maybe you move somewhere, you get a new job, the vehicle's not a good fit. So I don't think the state wanted to force people to hang on to a vehicle if it really wasn't working for them.
We have
And the
another,
Mileage Smart program also does not have a time requirement.
we have another question from David, asking if someone could speak to the prices paid at a public charging station, charge point, for instance, compared with the price of gasoline.
So the price you pay at a public charging station is set by the owner of that station. So there's no sort of standard price across the state. The legislature did take action about 2 years ago to allow station owners to set pricing on kilowatt hours of energy delivered. Prior to that, station owners were essentially required to set pricing based on the time people were plugged in. So kilowatt hours is a little bit more of a fair way of doing it. But you'll still see some charging stations that charge based on time, some on kilowatt hours, and some cases maybe a combination of the two. So that comparison to gasoline really varies depending on the owner of the charging station and how much, what their fee structure is. Typically, it's certainly more than you'd be paying for home charging. The equipment does cost money to install and operate. The charge point units cost typically around $5,000 to $6,000 for the equipment, plus the installation, plus $500 a year to operate it, to be on the network and take credit card payments. So all those costs add up, which means if a station owner is trying to, even if they're just trying to cover their costs, they may need to charge a significant premium over their cost of electricity to be made whole. So definitely the most economical way of charging it would be at home, and many of the utilities do have, Green Mountain Power has an off-peak rate program that will cut those costs even further. For ChargePoint charging, you can go on the ChargePoint app or website and look at a specific station, and they'll provide the pricing information and an estimate of what that might cost. And then just one last thing I will add, the fast charging is a premium above level 2 charging generally. It's much more expensive to install and operate. So for most drivers, it's not something that they use very frequently, but you can expect to pay probably more than you're paying for gasoline if you're using a fast charger today. Hopefully that'll be changing as we get more EVs, more charging opportunities, costs will come down, but at least for the near future, I would expect that to be the case.
Yeah, it's a
There's a great,
question.
oh, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna be selfish for a second because there's a question here that relates to one I wanted to ask myself. So, and there's been discussion about it in the chat of Tracy's question. How many solar panels do you need to fully charge an all-electric vehicle on a daily basis? And it's also kind of related to a question I had, which is that I am moving into an off-grid home that's not on the electric grid and is powered by solar with a gas backup. So it's kind of a relevant question of how many people live that way, and is it feasible to have a car in that sort of situation in Vermont? If you have any idea, I would love to know.
It may require some compromises. So I do know some folks who do that, and especially if you have public charging nearby, that's the pricing is reasonable to the prior discussion. Then you have that kind of backup if you need to get a charge and your solar isn't producing and things like that. We do have on the Drive Electric website a cost of ownership calculator that I'm just going to try to quickly share that talks about sort of roughly the efficiency for electric vehicles. It varies depending on the model, but there's less variation than you see with gasoline vehicles. So about 0.33 kilowatt hours to a mile of travel, or a way that's often expressed is more like 33 miles, 30 to 33 kilowatt hours per 100 miles. So how much energy you need your solar to produce is really dictated by how much driving you do. If you don't drive much, if you only drive 10, 20 miles a day, then you're looking at 15, 20 kilowatt hours. And you can get a sense. We do have links here to some additional calculator tools that will give you a more explicit estimate of kilowatt hours. And then you can take that kilowatt hour number, and there are online resources that will help you figure out what does that mean in terms of how many solar panels and things like that. Or I know many of the solar companies are very happy to help educate their customers on what that might translate to, and thinking about electric cars and cold climate heat pumps and just their general home electric use, and sort of factoring that in as you consider a solar design.
Thank you. That's a hard question. I know it is.
Another question here is, when do you expect all-wheel drive EV vehicles to be available?
Well, there are some today, so I'm gonna pull up my screen again. So this is that vehicle comparison tool, and if I go to all-wheel drive, I say I want to just look at models that have it standard, they do tend to be at the higher end of the range. So you see some of these luxury makes, Audi, BMW, but there are some more affordable ones, the Mitsubishi, Subaru Crosstrek, Mini Countryman. On the all-electric side, Tesla is the only manufacturer that has an all-wheel drive model that's eligible for the state of Vermont incentive. We do expect to see the Volkswagen ID.4 sometime later this year, and that'll come in both rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive variants for sort of somewhere around $40,000, hopefully. The Ford Mustang Mach-E is going to be showing up here pretty soon as well. So they're out there, but we do expect to see quite a few more, you know, in the next couple of years, including some of the pickup truck options that I mentioned earlier. You know, today there really aren't any, but and for example, the Ford F-150 is the most popular vehicle registered in Vermont today. So Ford is working on an all-electric version of that. Chevrolet has their electric Humvee. Some folks may have seen the advertising around that. That's due later this year. They're also going to be coming out with a more affordable pickup truck. So lots more options to come.
Exciting for rural areas. Someone's asking, how often do people encounter a waiting line at a charging station? Or perhaps from both of you, if you've heard any satisfaction or dissatisfaction with that in the state from people who have electric vehicles?
Yeah, the primary issue that I hear about from Vermont EV drivers isn't so much a waiting line as getting to a charger and finding that there's a problem with it. So there's some kind of maintenance issue, it's out of service. PlugShare is a great resource to check before you're going to a charging station, because people can check in and say, I used it, or no, it wasn't working for me. There was a problem, but it doesn't work 100% of the time. So one of the ways the state is trying to deal with that is just by adding some additional redundancy. So those additional chargers that I showed on the map of my presentation, those will all have at least 2 pieces of fast charging equipment, and most will also have backup level 2 charging available, just so, you know, if something goes wrong with one, that there's a backup. And Tesla has, you know, unsurprisingly already kind of figured this out, and most of the Tesla fast charging locations have 8 or more fast charging ports. There have been some reports of lines for Tesla fast charging, mostly like California, where adoption is higher for Tesla, but it could happen. It's not something that we've heard much about in Vermont, though, to date.
Yeah, have you had any feedback about that, Samantha, or kind of the same thing? Okay. Someone, I know who this is because they're thinking of going hybrid versus plug-in hybrid, wants to know what are the pros and cons of hybrid versus plug-in hybrids?
Well, you know, it depends on your situation, and there's some variation on, you know, specific models as well. So, for example, there's the Rav4, Toyota Rav4 small crossover, comes in both a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid version. So there's the Rav4 Hybrid and the Rav4 Prime, and some of the reviews I've read of the Prime suggest that it's nicer in many ways because that electric motor is there. It provides more power, so it can be combined with the gasoline motor, so you have sort of smoother acceleration and more power. If you're eligible to take advantage of the federal tax credit, then in many cases the additional cost of a plug-in hybrid comes back down to the cost of a regular hybrid if you know, between a federal tax credit, maybe some of the other incentives that are out there. So it's not always the case, but so in some cases you may not really be paying more. You may actually pay a little bit less for a plug-in hybrid versus a hybrid. There's not a great supply of used EVs generally. So if you're looking at a used vehicle, and you want sort of the most affordable option, then a non-plug-in hybrid, just a regular hybrid used vehicle. There's, you know, they've been around longer, there's more supply. So, you know, if you're looking to save and maybe go electric with your next vehicle, that I could see some folks might want to do that. I don't know, Samantha, if you have any.
No. Yeah, pros and cons, definitely. Our next question looks like it's for Samantha. Does Capstone's program also apply to leased electric vehicles?
Unfortunately, no. The Mileage Smart program is only for purchasing vehicles, and it's only for purchasing pre-owned vehicles. So under those requirements, leased vehicles are out. However, if you do want to lease an EV, that is where you would go to drive electric.
Great. And I do want to acknowledge it's past 6:30. I'm happy to keep going through questions. Are you both okay to keep answering?
Sure.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate it. I'm sure people do too. Charles has commented, there seems to be a limited inventory of used EVs, as you just kind of brought up. Has there been any consideration of encouraging dealers to keep leased vehicles on their lots when they are turned in at the end of a lease?
Yes, so part of the rollout of the Mileage Smart program last fall was to reach out to all of the dealerships. This is a constant effort. It can be quite difficult to get a hold of not just an owner, but sales teams, sales managers. So slowly but surely, we are getting in touch with them, educating them about this program, as well as asking them to prioritize EVs and high efficiency models for folks who would be eligible for this program. And just as an example, I showed the vehicle at Midstate. We have worked closely with them, and they actually built into their website a page solely for Mileage Smart eligible vehicles, and most of those have been turnarounds from leases. So we are working on making it a smooth process where you can even go to a dealership and know nothing about Mileage Smart, but they will refer you into the program directly.
That's really neat. If a car sits for a week, do the batteries stay charged or do they drain for EVs?
Depends on the car and the conditions. So generally speaking, sometimes it's called like a vampire load, where things kind of run down on its own. Most of the cars have pretty light standby loads. So in the summertime, if your car is left for a week, you shouldn't see much difference. Might be a little bit lower than when you left it. But in the wintertime, some of the vehicles have battery warmers that will kick on when it's very cold. And that can actually, in some cases, when it's really cold and with certain models, it can mean that the battery will get fully depleted and can actually be damaged. That's happened rarely, but I've heard of it happening with Nissan Leaf vehicles in the past. So there's improvements to battery chemistry that hopefully will prevent that from happening in the future, but important to keep that in mind. It's a good idea to keep things plugged in when it's really cold, if you can, and would always refer folks to check their owner's manual for details on, what specifically the automaker for that model is saying owners should do.
I've got one queued up here. Is it possible to charge an EV without a mobile phone?
Sure. So you can sign up for some of the memberships that I mentioned on the Drive Electric. So ChargePoint, for example, is a large network operator. If you sign up for ChargePoint, you can use a mobile phone to activate a station when you show up, but you can also ask ChargePoint to mail you a little tag that goes on your key fob, and you can use that to start a charging session. Most of the other networks will have access cards that work like that. So if you don't have a mobile phone, or some places you may not have good service, so it's a good idea to pick up some of those cards if you're planning to use any of those public charging locations.
That is a question I never would have thought to ask. So I love seeing these on here.
Here's one that I've been wondering about too. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Never. How many years do batteries last before they need to be replaced, and how expensive is it to replace them when they need to be?
It's a little bit of an open question yet, because EVs haven't been around all that long. They're still kind of figuring out the battery life. Most of the automakers will provide 8-year, 100,000-mile warranties on the batteries. So they should last at least that long, although in many cases that doesn't mean they'll be in their original condition at the end of that time period. It just means that the vehicle will still be operational. So you might see some of the Teslas that are out there that are older that have a couple 100,000 miles on them. You might see 10 to 15% loss in range compared to when new. Some of the other models that are out there, some of the earlier Nissan Leafs, if they were in a hot climate, they had some significantly higher range loss amounts. So if you're looking at a used EV, it's definitely recommended to get the battery checked out, make sure it's in good shape before you purchase. It can be replaced. The costs vary. There are some outfits that are looking at kind of remanufacturing the battery. So instead of replacing with a new one, they just sort of take out some of the bad cells that make up the overall battery pack, and then that can be done at a much lower cost. I think a Leaf battery replacement somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000 the last I heard, and that's one of the sort of smaller batteries. So it could be a very significant expense if you are faced with replacing one. But fortunately, we don't hear of that happening too often. And especially on the plug-in hybrid side, the automakers tend to be a little more conservative with how they use the batteries. So some of the Chevrolet Volts that are out there that have 10 years now, the batteries are on their original batteries. They're working great. So it can vary.
Yeah, this kind of factors into that maybe when you're thinking about cost. So someone's asking, what do the annual maintenance costs for EVs look like? Are they more or less expensive than a regular gas car, I suppose?
So the Drive Electric Vermont cost of ownership page is, if you scroll down on that, there is a little section that talks about savings. And that links to a Consumer Report study that came out pretty recently that suggested EVs cut typical maintenance costs in half compared to a gasoline vehicle. So their analysis suggested an average savings over the life of an electric vehicle of about $4,600. And that's based on real world data that Consumer Reports collects. So feel a little better about that than some of the more speculative cost of ownership calculations that are out there. And one of the reasons for those potential savings, so it's particularly with the all-electric models, you don't have some of the more routine maintenance things like oil changes. There's no oil, no engine, no spark plugs. Also, any of these electric cars or even the hybrid cars will usually have regenerative braking systems that basically turn the motor into a generator when you hit the brake pedal, and that saves a lot of wear and tear on the brake system. So that's just another way that helps reduce some of the future maintenance costs.
I'm seeing one more question. It looks like it was just sent to me though. So this person is wondering, for the Mileage Smart program, if they buy an EV in a state other than Vermont, can I still qualify for the Mileage Smart incentives?
Unfortunately, no. The vehicle must be purchased at a Vermont dealership.
And so that would also be relevant for someone who wanted to buy a car like privately from an individual.
Private sales are not eligible.
And I could mention for the new state of Vermont EV incentive program, you can purchase at an out-of-state dealer and get a direct incentive, but you do need to be pre-approved before that purchase. So there's information on the Drive Electric site about getting what's called a consumer direct incentive if you want to take advantage of that.
All right, Michael, are there more questions that I've missed?
I think we've covered most of them, yeah, that I can see.
I think we've got a lot of thank yous from people.
Yeah. Thanks, David and Samantha. That was great. Really informative.
Yeah, I know on Facebook we've had some nice comments as well. Our State Representative Becca White tuned in. She said, "Go Vermont," and some thank yous to both of you individually. So I think people hopefully got a lot out of this. I learned a lot. You see anything else I missed, Michael? No?
I don't think so. I did want to remark about the fact that I think this is probably the most well-attended green drinks that we've had yet. That's the height of the number of people who were here. So testament to the interest in the topic, and I'm really glad for you. Just such a great to listen to people who know so much about this, because there are so many questions and so many facets to it. So thank you again and thank you, Ginevra, for setting this up and doing such a great job of it.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I think you're right. This shows that a lot of people are really interested in moving into EVs and those types of hybrid plugins, all of that. So that's very encouraging to me. And I think, we've got all our questions answered. So thank you both for staying late also. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of
Thanks.
course. Thank you so much, Ginevra, for setting this up and having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity. And if folks have more questions, I think both Mileage Smart and the Drive Electric page have links to contact us. So feel free to reach out. Thanks, everybody.